Hello, it is day 2 of my StoWaStarMa video challenge. Today I'm going to be talking about Tony Iommi, the guitarist from Black Sabbath, who is the only member of Black Sabbath who has never been replaced at any point. He's been with the band from beginning all the way through, and even every other member has at one point or another been replaced with someone else. Even lead singer Ozzy Osbourne was at one point replaced with Ronnie James Dio. This is interesting to me because I love hearing how musicians found their sound, especially, well, even though I am not a musician myself, really. I played guitar in my younger years and was absolutely terrible at it, but I had fun doing it. Should really try again at some point, but neither here nor there. I really enjoy hearing how bands found their sound, especially people that have very unique and different sounds to their music. And so I found this story pretty interesting. When Tony Iommi learned to play guitar as a teenager, he plays left-handed, which means that he strums with his left hand and plays the frets with his right. When he was 17, he had been playing guitar for 3 years and was working in a sheet metal factory, which he describes as being not a bad job if you don't mind having a job. He was a welder there, and when parts would come down along the line, he'd weld them together and send it down for the next part of the process. I was unable to find out what exactly they were manufacturing with the sheet metal, but everything I saw said it was a sheet metal factory, but there was clearly some sort of manufacturing going on. Anyway, he had gotten a gig with a band that was going to be touring Germany, which would have been a big deal for him at that age. It would have been his first time being able to play guitar professionally and would be able, the idea of touring another country was really exciting. So he put in his notice, and on his last day of work, he went home for lunch. And while he was at lunch talking to his mother, he told her that he was thinking about not going back. And his mother, being a mother, told him that he had made a promise and he needed to follow through with his responsibilities and go back to work. And so he did, which turned out to have changed everything. That day when he went back to work, there was something he was supposed to weld that didn't arrive. And so they didn't have any welding work for him. So instead they put him on a machine that pressed and shaped the sheet metal. You would feed the sheet metal in, and then something would come down and press it into shape. And he had never worked on this machine before, but he figured he'd do it. It was his last day on the job. He starts feeding the sheet metal in, and the swing came down, and it severed the tips of his middle and ring finger on his right hand, which is the hand that he manipulated the strings with. This meant that he missed his opportunity to tour with that band, and the doctors told him he would never play guitar again. He, in interviews, had been asked why he didn't just switch to playing right-handed so that he could play the frets with his left hand. And he said at the time, he thought he'd been playing for a long time and that he wouldn't be able to get back that experience. He'd been playing for 3 years. He said that now, looking back on it, he realized that he hadn't learned nearly as much as he thought he had. And so, if he had it to do all over again, he would have switched hands. But so he's pretty dejected. He thinks he'll never be able to play again. He's talked to multiple doctors, and they've all said the same thing. It's just never going to happen. And then the manager of the factory where he worked came to visit him and brought a record and asked him to listen to it. And he said that he didn't want to listen to anything right then. It was just, he was so upset about not being able to play music anymore. He didn't want to hear someone else playing music. And his manager really pushed him and convinced him to give it a listen. So finally he does. And he's like, so what do you think? Is this guy any good? And he's like, yeah, he's really good. And his manager told him that that was Django Reinhardt. Reinhardt was a jazz musician in the 40s who had lost the ability to, had nerve damage in his hand and lost the ability to use 3 of his fingers after being in a fire. He's actually a pretty fascinating character, but that's a completely different story. Since he was able to play without those fingers and still play well, that made Iommi think, okay, he's going to give this another shot. So what he did was he took an empty soap bottle and melted it down and made caps for those 2 fingers so that he could press down on the strings. He shaped them to be the shape of fingertips. And it sort of worked, but it sort of didn't. They were slippery. He had a hard time holding the strings down. And there was also the issue that he couldn't really feel the fingers make contact with the strings. So he then capped the tips of them with leather he cut off of his leather jacket, and that gave them the ability to hold the strings better, and that worked, and that made him think that maybe this was a workable solution and that he could actually play again. So with his new finger caps, he started trying to relearn how to play, essentially. There was a difficulty because he had a hard time feeling the strings. Obviously, there's no sensation through the plastic. But also, he had a hard time because pressing down with the damaged fingertips caused him a lot of pain. And so this forced him to experiment with his guitar a little bit. So one of the first things he did was he took the strings off and he filed down the metal frets, which are the things the strings bend over when you press them down in order to adjust the tone of the guitar. And so that he wouldn't have to press as hard or as far. And that helped, but it wasn't enough. Another issue was the thickness of the strings. There were heavy gauge strings were the popular thing in guitar strings at the time, and he needed a lighter gauge string that he didn't have to press down as hard on. And unfortunately, at the time, that was something you really couldn't buy. They're quite common nowadays, but at the time, you couldn't buy that. And he contacted guitar string companies, and they said they couldn't do it. So he instead strung his guitar with banjo strings, which were lighter. And that worked. He could play that. But he wasn't satisfied with the sound. He felt like the sound wasn't powerful enough anymore. And so this caused him to experiment with other things. And so one of the first things he did is he switched from using a guitar amp to a bass amp, giving him more powerful sound that way. But he still kind of felt like it wasn't enough. And over the years, he experimented with different tunings on the guitar to give it different sound until he came up with something that is what we all know as the distinctive Black Sabbath sound. There have been some people who say that these slack tunings that he uses he did because they're easier for him to press down on, which they are. But he has said it's not really about that. That the real reason why he uses those tunings is because it gives a deeper sound. And that was what he was looking for, was that stronger sound. And, so ultimately, this accident he had when he was 17 is what is is what led to what we know as the distinctive guitar sound of Black Sabbath, which has been influential to so many other bands, that it has really changed the course of rock history. And so I find this to be a very, very interesting story. Just a, freak accident that seemed to be a fateful moment. So before I go, this being part of my video challenge, I'm going to draw another video suggestion out of the hat to see what I'll be making tomorrow. So hold on just a second. Get the hat. I'm not gonna look. All right, so tomorrow I will be making a video on, oh boy, I'm gonna pronounce this badly. Eurytion of Figelia. I know he's Greek. I know who he is. This is an interesting story. I'm gonna need to do a little research though. I have no idea how to pronounce this. That's something I'm gonna have to research actually. But all right, so I will see you tomorrow for a video on that. Once again, thanks for watching everybody, and stay spooky. Have a nice day.